In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses were neatly lined up along the tree-lined streets, there lived a man who loved peace and privacy. His name was Marcus, and he had lived in the neighborhood for years. Marcus was a hard-working man. He worked at a local tech company and kept to himself, mostly enjoying his free time by his beautiful backyard pool. It was his private oasis, a place where he could relax after long days at work, away from the pressures of life. The neighbors didn't bother him much, and he didn't bother them either. Marcus had a simple routine. He would often wake up early, enjoy a cup of coffee on the patio, and then spend a few hours by the pool. Sometimes, he would invite a few friends over, but only for quiet, small gatherings. The neighborhood was the perfect place for someone like him, calm, orderly, and full of polite, friendly neighbors. At least, that's what Marcus thought. Things began to change when a new family moved into one of the houses down the street. The woman of the house, Karen, had moved in with her husband and 2 children. They had only been in the neighborhood for a few months, but Karen quickly made her presence known. She was the type of person who believed that because she was wealthy and had a certain social status, the rules didn't apply to her. She quickly became involved with the Homeowners Association, HOA, which oversaw the rules and regulations of the neighborhood. The HOA was known for being strict. They enforced the smallest details, from the color of your mailbox to how long your grass could grow before needing to be cut. Most of the neighbors didn't mind, as the rules were simple and fair. However, Karen had different ideas. She quickly started making waves, suggesting new rules that would benefit her and her family, even if they weren't what most of the neighbors wanted. It didn't take long before Karen's demands became more and more outrageous. One day, Marcus was lounging by his pool, enjoying a rare afternoon off, when Karen approached him. He noticed her walking over, and even from a distance, he could see the confident way she held herself. She had an air of entitlement about her, as if she expected to get whatever she wanted just because she asked for it. "Marcus," she called out as she approached his gate. "How are you today?" Marcus looked up, surprised. He hadn't spoken much to Karen since she moved in. She had often been seen talking to the HOA members, but he hadn't paid much attention to her. He gave her a polite smile and waved. "Good, thank you. How are you, Karen?" She smiled back, but there was something different about her today. She wasn't just making small talk. There was a purpose behind her approach. "I'm doing well, thank you," she said. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something." She paused and looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching. "I'm planning a party for the kids this weekend, and I was hoping you could let me use your pool." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had never been the type to host big parties, let alone let someone else use his pool. It was his private space, after all. He wasn't interested in having a crowd of strangers splashing around in the water, especially without asking. "I'm not sure about that, Karen," Marcus replied, trying to keep the conversation friendly. "I usually keep the pool to myself, you know. It's just a place to relax after work." Karen wasn't having it. She laughed, as if Marcus had said something funny. "Oh, come on. It's just a pool. I'm sure you won't mind sharing it for one day. The kids would love it, and it's just going to be a few people. I'll even take care of everything. You won't have to lift a finger." Marcus shook his head. "I understand, but I really prefer to keep it private." Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Listen," she said, her tone changing slightly, "it's really important for the kids, and it'll be good for the neighborhood. A party like this could bring everyone together. Plus, I'm sure the HOA would approve of this kind of gathering. It's good for the community." Marcus didn't like the direction this conversation was going. It wasn't about the kids or the community, it was about her wanting to use his property without asking for permission. He felt a bit uncomfortable with how quickly she assumed she could just take over his space. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I can't let you use the pool," Marcus said firmly, standing up. "It's just not something I want to do. I'm sure you can find another place." Karen's face turned a little red. Her smile disappeared completely, and she took a step closer, almost as if she was trying to intimidate him. "You're really going to turn me down?" she asked, her voice cold now. "Do you know how much trouble you're going to cause by not helping out? I'm just asking for one day." "I'm sorry, Karen, but no," Marcus repeated. "I'm not going to change my mind on this." For a moment, Karen just stared at him, her face tight with anger. She wasn't used to being told no. Not here, not in this neighborhood where everyone followed the rules and kept the peace. But Marcus wasn't going to back down. He had made it clear. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, he just didn't feel comfortable with the request. The pool was his space, and he didn't feel like giving it up to someone who thought they could just ask for whatever they wanted. Karen, realizing that Marcus wasn't going to budge, took a step back. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "But don't think this is over. I'll remember this." As she turned to walk away, Marcus stood there for a moment, shaking his head. He couldn't believe how demanding she had been. But he wasn't about to let her push him around. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. The next few days were quiet, or so Marcus thought. After the confrontation by the pool, he had hoped that would be the end of the matter. He went about his usual routine, working during the day and enjoying the peace of his backyard in the evenings. The sun would set slowly, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink, and Marcus would relax by his pool, letting the cool water calm his mind. It was the perfect way to unwind after a long day at work. But then, a few days later, something unexpected happened. Marcus was in his backyard, doing some light maintenance on the pool, when he saw Karen walking down the street towards his gate. At first, he thought maybe she was just passing by, but as she got closer, it was clear she had come to speak to him again. "Marcus!" Karen called out, her voice bright but with an edge of impatience. Marcus turned, wiping his hands on his shorts. He had been fixing a small leak in one of the pool pipes, but now he was beginning to feel uneasy. He didn't know what else she could want, but he was certain it wasn't good news. "Hello, Karen. What's going on?" Marcus asked, trying to sound polite. Karen didn't waste time with small talk. "I've been thinking about it," she began, "and I'm sure you've reconsidered my offer." She was smiling, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I really think this would be good for everyone. The kids would love it, and you wouldn't have to do much. Just let us use your pool for a few hours, and I'll take care of the rest. You wouldn't even know we were here." Marcus frowned, feeling his patience begin to thin. He had already told her no, and now she was coming back with the same request, as if he hadn't spoken. He felt a bit trapped, like she was trying to pressure him into changing his mind. But he stood firm, reminding himself that his pool was his sanctuary, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. "I've already told you, Karen, I'm not interested in letting anyone use my pool," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I understand that you want to host a party, but that's just not something I'm comfortable with." Karen's smile wavered, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might back off. But then, to his surprise, her face hardened, and she took a step closer to him, her eyes narrowing. "You're really not going to help out?" she asked, her voice cold. "You don't see how important this is? The HOA is going to hear about this. You're making the whole neighborhood look bad by refusing. I thought you were a good neighbor, but clearly, I was wrong." Marcus stood tall, trying not to let her words get to him. He had dealt with people like Karen before, those who believed their status could give them power over others. but he wasn't going to let her manipulate him into doing something he didn't want to do. "Karen, I've made my decision. It's my pool, and I have every right to keep it private. You can't force me to change my mind." Karen crossed her arms, standing there as if she were about to say something more, but then she just turned and walked away without another word. As she left, Marcus let out a long sigh, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. He had stood his ground, but he knew this wasn't over. He could already see in her eyes that she wouldn't let this go. The next morning, Marcus received a letter in his mailbox. It was from the HOA. The letter was official, with the HOA's logo at the top, and it was addressed directly to him. The letter stated that he had violated one of the neighborhood's community guidelines by refusing to let Karen use his pool for her event. The letter was filled with polite but stern language, reminding him that the HOA encouraged community involvement and that he was expected to cooperate with his neighbors. Marcus couldn't believe it. The HOA had gotten involved, and now it seemed like he was being pressured to comply. He read the letter again, trying to figure out if there had been any misunderstanding. But no, it was clear the HOA was siding with Karen. They even mentioned that they had received multiple complaints about his refusal and were concerned that his actions were disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. The letter also mentioned that if he didn't comply, he could face a fine. Marcus was stunned. He had never been one to break rules, and he had always followed the guidelines of the HOA. But this felt wrong. The HOA was backing up Karen's unreasonable request, and he couldn't help but feel like he was being bullied. He wasn't the type to back down easily, but the pressure was building. His first instinct was to ignore the letter, to continue living his life as he had always done. But he knew that ignoring the HOA could lead to more trouble. He would have to respond. Marcus decided to take a stand. He knew he had every right to refuse the request, and he wasn't going to let the HOA or Karen push him around. He wasn't going to give in to their demands, no matter how much pressure they put on him. That evening, after dinner, Marcus sat down at his desk and drafted a carefully worded response to the HOA. He explained his side of the situation, how he had been approached by Karen and had politely refused her request to use his pool. He reminded them that the pool was his private property and that he had every right to make that decision. He made it clear that he was not violating any neighborhood guidelines, and he would not tolerate being forced into a situation where he felt uncomfortable. The next morning, Marcus mailed the letter. It was a simple, direct response, but he felt a sense of relief once it was done. He had stood up for himself, and he knew that no matter what happened next, he had done what was right. Days passed, and Marcus hoped that after sending the letter to the HOA, things would finally settle down. He had done what he thought was right, but deep down, he knew that Karen wouldn't let go so easily. As the days dragged on, the tension in the neighborhood began to build. He could feel the eyes of the other neighbors on him, and he wasn't sure if they were on his side or if they had been influenced by Karen's version of events. One afternoon, as Marcus was finishing up some work in his office, he received a text message from an unknown number. He wasn't sure who it was, but when he opened it, his heart sank. The message was from Karen, and it read, "You'll regret refusing me. I've already talked to the HOA, and they'll be taking action soon. Get ready." Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure how to respond. He had already made it clear that he wasn't going to let her use his pool, and he had done everything he could to stand his ground. But Karen wasn't backing down, and now it seemed like she was pushing for something more. He could almost feel her anger coming through in the words, and it worried him. He decided not to respond. Instead, he put his phone down and walked outside to the backyard. The pool was still the same, calm, still, and inviting. It was his retreat, his escape from the chaos of the outside world. But today, it felt different. There was a sense of looming conflict in the air, like the calm before a storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen, something big. The next morning, Marcus was in the kitchen, making himself some coffee, when he heard a knock at the door. It was early, too early for anyone to be visiting, and Marcus felt a sense of dread wash over him. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked to the door, wondering if it was another letter from the HOA or, even worse, an officer from the local police. When he opened the door, he was shocked to see a group of people standing there. It wasn't just Karen this time. She had brought the HOA president, Mr. Rogers, along with a few other neighbors. They were all standing there, their faces serious, and Karen was in the front, looking smug. Before Marcus could say anything, Karen spoke up. "Marcus, you need to understand something," she said, her tone full of authority. "You've caused a disturbance, and it's not just about the pool anymore. The HOA is involved now, and they're going to take action. We can't let this go on any longer." Marcus looked at her, trying to remain calm, but his frustration was starting to build. "What do you mean, take action?" he asked. "I've already explained myself. I don't want to let anyone use my pool, and that's my choice. I don't see why this is still an issue." Karen crossed her arms. "Because it's not just your choice anymore," she replied coldly. "The HOA has decided that your refusal is a problem. You've disrupted the neighborhood, and now we have to address it. This is about more than just your pool, it's about being part of the community." Marcus felt his blood start to boil. He had been calm, trying to be reasonable, but now he was being told that his decision to protect his privacy was somehow wrong. "This is my property," he said firmly. "I have the right to do what I want with it. I've told you no, and I've told the HOA no. I don't want to get involved in whatever you're planning." Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, Mr. Rogers, the HOA president, stepped forward. He was a middle-aged man, wearing a button-up shirt and khakis, and he looked as if he were trying to act as the voice of reason. "Marcus," he began, his tone measured, "we understand your concerns, but we have to look at the bigger picture. We've received complaints from several neighbors about the way the situation has unfolded. They feel uncomfortable with your refusal, and we believe that it's causing unnecessary tension in the community. We can't allow that to continue." Marcus was taken aback. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're siding with her?" he asked, gesturing towards Karen. "This is about her trying to use my private property for her own party, not about the community." Mr. Rogers looked uncomfortable, but he didn't back down. "It's about community, Marcus. We all have to work together to keep things peaceful and orderly. The HOA has rules in place to ensure that everyone gets along, and when one person refuses to cooperate, it affects the entire neighborhood." The tension was palpable. Marcus felt his face flush with anger, but he knew he had to stay calm. He had already made up his mind he wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA bully him into doing something he didn't want to do. "I'm not going to change my mind," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "I'm not going to let you or anyone else use my pool. If that's what you've come here to tell me, then I suggest you leave." For a moment, no one said anything. The group stood there, staring at him, and Marcus could feel the weight of their judgment. It was as if they were all waiting for him to break, to give in. But he didn't. He stood his ground, refusing to let anyone dictate what he could or couldn't do with his property. Finally, Karen stepped forward again, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You'll regret this," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You'll see what happens when you refuse to cooperate. You won't get away with this, Marcus." With that, the group turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what Karen had planned next, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to back down. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going to let anyone take his peace away from him. As the group left, Marcus closed the door slowly, his mind racing. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was ready for whatever came his way. He had stood up for himself, and he wouldn't let anyone push him around. The next few days after the confrontation were filled with an uncomfortable silence. Marcus had expected Karen to continue her campaign, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly things would escalate. It seemed like the whole neighborhood was buzzing about his refusal to allow Karen to use his pool. Neighbors who had never spoken to him before started eyeing him with curiosity, and some even gave him strange, disapproving looks when they saw him outside. Marcus knew that Karen wasn't the type of person to let a situation like this go. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to let his refusal stand without consequences. But what could she do? He had already told her no, and he wasn't going to change his mind. One evening, as Marcus was relaxing on his patio with a cold drink, he saw Karen walking down the street toward his house again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a police officer, and they both approached his gate with purpose. Marcus stood up, feeling a wave of irritation wash over him. He had been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it any easier to handle. He walked toward the gate, trying to keep his cool, but he could already feel his heart racing in his chest. Karen was the first to speak. "Marcus, I told you this wouldn't be over," she said, her voice almost sweet, but it was clear there was no kindness behind it. "I've had enough of your disrespect. You're causing trouble in the neighborhood, and it's time for the police to get involved." The officer, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice firm but polite, "we've received a complaint, and I need to ask you about the situation with your pool. Is it true that you're refusing to let your neighbor use it for a party?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't sure how to respond at first, but he knew that he had to stay calm. "Yes, officer, it's true," he said, his voice steady. "I've told her that I don't want anyone using my pool. It's my private property, and I have the right to decide who can use it." The officer nodded but didn't seem convinced. "We understand that, sir, but the HOA has received multiple complaints about this situation. People are concerned, and they're asking us to intervene. Is there any way you could reconsider your decision? It's causing a lot of tension in the neighborhood." Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not going to change my mind," he said. "I don't want to let anyone use my pool, and I don't think that's unreasonable. The HOA has no right to force me to do something I don't want to do. This is my home, and I should be able to decide what happens here." Karen stepped forward again, her expression smug. "You see, officer. He's being difficult on purpose. He's causing trouble for everyone else, and now the whole neighborhood is upset. You can't just let him get away with this." The officer turned to Karen, nodding slowly. "I understand your concerns, ma'am, but the law is clear. If the man doesn't want to let others use his pool, he doesn't have to. It's his private property." Karen's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "But officer, he's disrupting the peace. Everyone's talking about it. We can't just ignore this. He needs to be held accountable for his actions." The officer hesitated, clearly not wanting to cause any more trouble. "I'll need to check with my supervisor," he said, "but for now, it's clear that there's no law being broken. I suggest you both try to work things out without involving the police further." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had been dragged into this ridiculous situation, and now it seemed like Karen was trying to make him out to be the villain. He was doing nothing wrong. He was just protecting his privacy. But it wasn't enough for Karen. She wanted him to bend to her will, and she wasn't going to stop until she got her way. The officer left after a few more words, promising to keep an eye on the situation but clearly not siding with Karen. As he walked away, Karen shot Marcus one last, icy look. "You haven't heard the last of this," she said, before turning and walking away with the officer. Marcus stood there, his heart still pounding, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had expected some kind of confrontation, but he hadn't expected the police to be involved. Karen had gone too far this time. He wasn't sure what she had planned next, but he knew he couldn't just sit back and let her continue to push him around. He went inside and sat down at his kitchen table, trying to think of what to do next. His phone buzzed on the counter, and he picked it up to see a new message. It was from the HOA president, Mr. Rogers. The message read, "Marcus, we've received word that you refuse to cooperate with the police and are continuing to block your neighbor's request. The HOA is considering further action. We expect you to comply with the community rules, and we hope this situation can be resolved peacefully." Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise again. It was clear that the HOA was now siding with Karen, and they were pressuring him to give in. But he wasn't going to let them dictate how he lived his life. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he wasn't going to let anyone tell him otherwise. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. He had tried to handle the situation quietly, but now it seemed like there was no way to avoid a confrontation. Karen and the HOA were making this personal, and it was only a matter of time before they took their next step. The following week, the pressure on Marcus only increased. He was constantly receiving messages from the HOA, pushing him to resolve the situation with Karen. The neighborhood had grown tense, and even the most casual exchanges with his neighbors felt strained. Some of them had started avoiding him, while others gave him nervous glances, as though they weren't sure which side they should be on. The calm, peaceful neighborhood he had once loved was now filled with an undercurrent of unease. One evening, after another long day at work, Marcus sat on his patio, trying to clear his head. The pool, still drained from the previous week, looked empty and lifeless. It was a stark reminder of the lengths he had gone to just to keep his peace. As he sat there, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his lawyer. "Marcus, I just spoke with the HOA's lawyer. They're threatening to fine you if you don't allow Karen to use your pool for her event. They claim it's a violation of community rules. We'll need to respond soon." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. The HOA, now fully aligned with Karen, was pushing him into a corner. They were threatening him with fines, trying to make him comply with their demands. But Marcus wasn't ready to back down. He had always believed in standing up for himself, even when it was difficult. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer back. After a brief discussion, they agreed that the best course of action was to send a formal response to the HOA, outlining his position clearly. They would argue that no laws were being broken, and that he had every right to maintain control over his private property. Marcus knew it was a risk, but it was one he had to take. He couldn't let Karen and the HOA dictate his life. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared to send a letter, he heard a knock at his door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his first instinct was to ignore it. But curiosity got the best of him, and he went to answer the door. Standing on the other side was a delivery man holding a large envelope. He handed it to Marcus without saying a word and then walked away. Marcus closed the door and opened the envelope. It was a formal notice from the HOA. The letter was even more aggressive than the previous ones, threatening legal action if he did not comply. It also mentioned the police's involvement, implying that he was causing unnecessary trouble in the neighborhood. Marcus couldn't believe what he was reading. The HOA had gone too far. They were now using the police to try to force him to give in, and they were willing to take things to the next level. He tossed the letter on the table, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about a pool anymore, it was about his right to live freely in his own home without interference. The following morning, Marcus woke up early and decided to take matters into his own hands. He had had enough of the threats and the pressure. He couldn't keep living under the weight of the HOA's demands. So, he made a bold decision: he would drain the pool completely, and this time, he would make sure it was permanent. He wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA use his property for their own gain. If they wanted to take action, they could do so without his pool. He gathered the necessary tools and started the draining process. It was a big job, but he was determined to follow through. As the water slowly disappeared, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. The pool, which had once been a source of relaxation, was now a symbol of the battle he had been forced into. Every drop of water that disappeared from the pool felt like a step closer to regaining control over his own life. As he worked, Marcus couldn't help but think about how things had gotten to this point. He had never imagined that a simple request to use his pool would turn into such a conflict. Karen had pushed him into a corner, and now the HOA was backing her up. It felt like everyone in the neighborhood had turned against him, and he was standing alone. Just as he was finishing up the draining process, Marcus saw a figure approaching from the street. It was Karen, and she was walking toward him with the same sense of entitlement she had shown before. This time, however, she wasn't alone. She had brought a few of her friends with her, and they were all walking toward his house with purpose. Marcus stood up, wiping the sweat from his brow. He didn't want another confrontation, but it seemed inevitable. As Karen and her friends reached his gate, she smiled smugly. "I see you finally decided to do the right thing," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I knew you'd come around eventually. You've made the right choice, Marcus. The neighborhood will appreciate it." Marcus crossed his arms, trying to remain calm. "I haven't done anything wrong, Karen," he said. "This is my property, and I have every right to do what I want with it. I'm not giving in to your demands, and I'm not going to let you use my pool." Karen's smile faltered, and she stepped closer. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice low and threatening. "You've made a lot of enemies by refusing me. The HOA will not let this go. You've made a mistake, Marcus, and now you'll pay for it." Marcus held his ground. He had already drained the pool, and there was no turning back now. "I'm done listening to your threats, Karen," he said firmly. "You can try to make me pay, but I'm not backing down. This is my home, and I'm going to live here the way I want." Karen's expression twisted with anger, but she didn't say anything else. Instead, she turned and walked away, her friends following behind her. Marcus watched them go, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't over yet, but he had made his stand. He had taken control of his own life again, and no one could take that away from him. As the days went on, things began to quiet down. The HOA didn't follow through with their threats, and Karen seemed to back off, at least for now. Marcus knew the conflict wasn't truly over. He had no doubt that Karen would find another way to cause trouble. But for now, he had won. He had fought for his rights, and he had kept his peace. And that was something he could hold on to.